Okay, let's begin. The topic of this video is explicit versus implicit knowledge in second language acquisition. Okay, so in this video, I want you to remember these two words, explicit and implicit, at least. Okay, so let's begin. So to begin with, let me explain these two words, explicit and implicit. Obviously, explicit and implicit are antonyms to each other, so they mean opposite things. For example, this dictionary defines explicit as clearly and fully expressed, and implicit is defined like this. Implicit means not expressed directly or not explicit. Okay. So when we say explicit knowledge or implicit knowledge, the key distinction is whether or not we can clearly and accurately explain, express, or report the knowledge verbally. Verbally means using language. So we can explain our explicit knowledge, but we cannot explain our implicit knowledge even if we have it. And also, explicit knowledge is sometimes called declarative. So explicit knowledge is the same as declarative knowledge. And the word declarative comes from the word declare. Declare means to say something clearly. So declarative knowledge refers to knowledge that can be declared. And it is knowledge of facts and events, and sometimes it is called knowledge of what. So for example, we can explain what an apple is like. Usually an apple is red, maybe sometimes it is green, and maybe I think we know the size of an apple, and we can say things like an apple is a fruit, or maybe some other things. So we can explain what an apple is like. And if explicit knowledge is declarative, implicit knowledge is not declarative. So implicit knowledge is not declarative. It is called procedural. Procedural. So this is a difficult word, I think. So the word procedural comes from the word procedure. According to this dictionary, procedure is a series of actions that are done in a certain way or order. And according to another dictionary, a procedure is a series of steps taken to accomplish an end. Maybe still this is a little difficult, but procedural knowledge or implicit knowledge is knowledge of skills. So please contrast it with this knowledge of facts and events. This is explicit knowledge or declarative knowledge, and when we say implicit knowledge or procedural knowledge, we mean knowledge of skills. And sometimes it's called knowledge of how. So for example, how to ride a bicycle. So we can't really explain how we actually ride a bicycle, even though we can ride a bicycle. We don't really know where our body or maybe our brains know how we ride our bicycle, but we don't know how to explain how we do it. So for example, when we ride a bicycle, our muscles, many of our muscles and many of our joints are moving in synchronization, maybe, and at specific timing, and we don't really know how we move our muscles and joints to keep the balance on the bicycle or to move forward. We just don't know how our bodies are moving when we are riding a bicycle. But still, we can ride a bicycle. Okay, so even though we can't explain how we do it, we can do it. So this is implicit knowledge or procedural knowledge. So riding a bicycle is an example of a procedure. Okay. So now the question is our language knowledge explicit or implicit? So from now on, we're going to talk about language, and here language knowledge is language knowledge used to comprehend and produce language. So it is something that we have in our brains. It is the same as Chomsky's linguistic competence. So language knowledge is the knowledge of language that we use to comprehend and produce language. And we all have this. As far as our first language or mother tongue is concerned. And so the question is whether our language knowledge is explicit or implicit. The answer for this question depends on whether we are talking about our first language or our second language. And the answer for our first language is clear. So the knowledge of our first language is largely implicit. It is implicit, definitely. So much of our knowledge of the L1 or mother tongue is implicit. We can use our L1, but we cannot always explain properties of our L1. So for example, so this is a grammatical sentence in Japanese, and this is not grammatical. The only difference is in this grammatical particle. So in this sentence, the choice of this grammatical particle is just wrong. But the difference is so small that we can't really explain why this is wrong, why this is ungrammatical. But if you are a native speaker of Japanese, I think you can intuitively understand that this sentence is not grammatical. I think we never say this. But can you explain why we can't say this? Usually, we cannot explain this kind of thing. And that's natural. That's quite natural. Because our knowledge of the first language or the mother tongue is implicit. We can use it. We have it in our mind, but we can't really explain it. So, and also the ability to use our L1 is largely implicit. So we can speak, we know how to speak our L1. However, we cannot explain how we actually do it, how we actually speak our L1. And we cannot explain the steps involved in the use of the L1. There are many steps involved in the use of the L1 when we produce sentences in the L1. There are many steps, but we don't really know what those steps are, and we can't explain them. So language use depends mainly on implicit knowledge. But what about explicit language knowledge? Does such a thing exist? Yes, it does. Explicit language knowledge is metalinguistic knowledge. And meta X is X about X. So meta-language. So metalinguistic comes from the word meta-language. Meta-language is language about language. So for example, words, sentence, noun, verb, adjective, adverb, subject, object. These are all meta-language. Okay. So an example of metalinguistic knowledge is something like English is an subject-verb-object language. Okay. So we explicitly know this because we learned this knowledge when we were maybe a junior high school student. And our teachers told us that in English, we have the object, we have the verb before the object, but in Japanese we have the object before the verb. And we explicitly know this. So, and this is metalinguistic knowledge about English. But it doesn't really mean knowing this explicitly doesn't really mean that we can use it. Even if you know this, even if you have this metalinguistic knowledge, maybe excuse me, you are not able to use it. Use the same knowledge when you speak English. I don't know. And young children don't have much explicit knowledge about their L1, but they can speak their L1. No problem. They can do it. So actually, explicit language knowledge or metalinguistic knowledge is not essential for language use. We don't really need it. So it is only secondary knowledge. So the status of explicit knowledge or metalinguistic knowledge is secondary, not primary. So the primary language knowledge is implicit knowledge. So implicit language knowledge is critical. It is essential for us to use language. And these two types of knowledge also differ in terms of automaticity. The use of implicit language knowledge, for example, the use of L1 is automatic. So we can use our implicit language knowledge automatically, while the use of explicit or metalinguistic knowledge is not automatic. So the use of explicit knowledge is not automatic. So sometimes it is called a controlled process. So and it is a slow process, and it is effortful process. So we have to make efforts to use our explicit knowledge. It's not easy, it's difficult, and we usually do it consciously. In contrast, the use of implicit knowledge is automatic, it is fast, it is effortless, it is easy, so we don't have to make efforts, and it is subconscious. So we don't really have to use it quite consciously. We don't have to pay much attention. We don't need a lot of concentration. We can just do it subconsciously. It's easy. It's fast. It's effortless. It is automatic. And if you think about riding a bicycle, I think you can ride a bicycle effortlessly usually, and you don't have to think about how you move your muscles and joints all the time. You can do it subconsciously. And also these two types of knowledge differ in the roles they play in language production when we speak. So explicit or metalinguistic knowledge can be used only indirectly for spontaneous language production, and the role it plays is as a monitor. The role as a monitor, and I will explain this later what a monitor is. But some researchers say, or actually they believe, proceduralized explicit knowledge can be used directly, not indirectly. directly for language production. So I will also talk about this later, but yes, let me talk about it later. But please keep this in mind. Proceduralize explicit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is not procedural. It is declarative, but some people say there is such a thing called proceduralized explicit knowledge. But usually, explicit, normal, not proceduralized one, normal explicit knowledge can be used only indirectly for spontaneous language production. And in contrast, implicit language knowledge is directly used to produce language spontaneously. So when we produce language spontaneously, we use this. We use our implicit language knowledge. And these two types of knowledge also differ in the usefulness for speaking and writing. Explicit or metalinguistic knowledge is more useful for writing than for speaking. Why is it so? During speaking, there is not enough time to use explicit knowledge. So please remember that. Where is it? The use of explicit knowledge is not automatic. It is slow, it is effortful, and it is conscious. So, but during speaking, we don't have enough time because we have someone to talk to in front of us, and if we take too much time, I think our listeners will not like it. So we shouldn't spend too much time when we say something, but because we need a lot of time to use our explicit knowledge, it is not so useful during speaking. But during writing, we have a lot more time, and we can use explicit knowledge more readily, more easily. So explicit knowledge is more useful for writing than for speaking. In contrast, implicit language knowledge is useful for both speaking and writing. It is useful even if we don't have enough time. So this is a summary of the differences between explicit and implicit language knowledge. So explicit knowledge is declarative, it is metalinguistic, it is secondary. The use of explicit knowledge is a controlled process. It is a slow process. It is an effortful process. It is a conscious process. And explicit knowledge is only indirectly used for spontaneous language production, and it is useful. It is more useful for writing than for speaking. And this one, I'm going to talk about this later. But explicit knowledge is what Krashen called learned knowledge. And implicit knowledge is procedural knowledge, and it is not metalinguistic. It is not metalinguistic, so it is purely linguistic. And implicit language knowledge is primary language knowledge, and the use of implicit knowledge is automatic. It is fast. It is effortless. It is subconscious, and implicit knowledge can be used directly for spontaneous language production, and it is used for both speaking and writing. And implicit knowledge is the same as what Krashen called acquired knowledge, and I'm going to talk about this later. Okay, now let's turn to second language. So yes, there is a distinction between explicit and implicit second language knowledge. And second language learners should acquire implicit second language knowledge to speak their L2, of course, because implicit language knowledge is the primary language knowledge, and explicit language knowledge is only secondary. So what we should try to acquire is implicit second language knowledge. I mean, if we want to speak our L2, or if we want to use our L2 fluently, it is implicit second language knowledge, not explicit knowledge that we should acquire. However, in some cases of instructed second language acquisition or foreign language learning, everything is taught explicitly, and so learners learn explicitly. So these are pages from a textbook for junior high school English in Japan, and we have many sentences, and we have some new words, and we have some new grammars, and our teacher explains everything explicitly, what the words mean and what the sentences mean, and how to use the grammars, things like that. Our teachers just teach everything explicitly, and we learn explicitly. But obviously, the ultimate goal of second language acquisition is to acquire implicit second language knowledge. But many learners learn explicitly because teachers teach explicitly, especially in a foreign language environment. So an important question for us to ask now is, does explicit second language learning or teaching lead to the acquisition of implicit second language knowledge? Or what roles does explicit second language knowledge play in the acquisition of implicit second language knowledge? Or does explicit second language knowledge turn into or become implicit second language knowledge? So we need to ask these questions. And actually, researchers have asked these questions, and there are some positions, there are some answers. We have a few positions, a few answers, and usually we call them interface positions. So we have a few interface positions. So here the interface is the interface between explicit and implicit knowledge, and this is also a difficult word. What does it mean, interface? Interface is the place or area at which different things meet and communicate with or affect each other. So we have explicit second language knowledge, implicit second language knowledge, and this is the interface. So the first interface position that we are going to talk about is the no interface position. So there is no interface between explicit and implicit second language knowledge. So according to this position, explicit second language knowledge plays no role in the acquisition of implicit second language knowledge. And explicit second language knowledge does not turn into implicit second language knowledge, even through practice. Even if we practice using explicit second language knowledge, it does not become implicit second language knowledge. So this will not become this. However, explicit second language knowledge can play a role as a monitor during second language use, during the use of the second language, not during the acquisition of the second language. So what is a monitor? So according to this view, our implicit second language knowledge produces our initial sentence. So it's our initial output, and we can use our explicit second language knowledge or metalinguistic second language knowledge as a monitor of this initial sentence, initial output. And in this case, let's say our initial output is he live here, and this lacks the third person singular s, and this is detected by the monitor, and then we can supply the third person singular s and make this as our final output. But for this to take place, we need time, and if we don't have enough time, our explicit second language knowledge does not work as a monitor, and our final production will be the same as our initial output. So we say this instead of this. And this view was proposed by this famous researcher called Krashen, who also distinguished learning and acquisition. So Krashen's learning means the acquisition of explicit or metalinguistic knowledge, and Krashen's acquisition is the acquisition of implicit knowledge. And the second position is called the strong interface position. Strong interface position. And according to this position, explicit second language knowledge will turn into or become implicit second will turn into implicit second language knowledge given enough practice. So if we do a lot of practice using this explicit knowledge, our explicit knowledge will become implicit knowledge. So this will become this. Or at least it will become proceduralized or automatic, even though it is still explicit. So this will become proceduralized or automatic. So here we are using the declarative procedural distinction. So explicit knowledge is declarative knowledge, and declarative second language knowledge will turn into proceduralized or automatic declarative second language knowledge. So it is still declarative, but it has been proceduralized and it is automatic now. So this type of knowledge can function in a similar way to the real implicit second language knowledge. But it's still different. It is still declarative, but it is automatic. We can use it automatically. And the use of it is proceduralized. Okay, so this is the strong interface position. And according to this position, explicit second language knowledge plays a central role, very, very important role, in the acquisition of implicit knowledge, because implicit knowledge starts as explicit knowledge. Explicit knowledge becomes implicit knowledge. So the first thing we have to do to acquire our second language is to acquire explicit knowledge. Later, it will become implicit knowledge. So the acquisition of explicit knowledge is very, very important according to this position. And actually, this position is supported by many second language acquisition researchers now, and it is also assumed by many teaching methods, such as presentation practice production method. But we should keep in mind that here practice should match real or natural communication. So mechanical practice or decontextualized practice or isolated practice will not suffice. We have to practice in such a way that our practice matches our natural communication. And there is another interface position, which is the weak interface position. So according to this position, explicit second language knowledge does not directly become implicit second language knowledge, but explicit second language knowledge helps the acquisition of implicit second language knowledge. So this thing facilitates the acquisition of implicit second language knowledge. And how does it do so? Explicit second language knowledge helps noticing. It helps learners notice a new linguistic feature. So this facilitates this by helping learners notice things. So according to this position, explicit second language knowledge plays some role, not a central role, not no role. It plays some role in the acquisition of implicit second language knowledge. And here we have some educational implications. Teaching or learning explicitly does not directly lead to the acquisition of implicit second language knowledge. Actually, this view is shared by both the no interface position and the strong interface position, because the no interface position says explicit second language knowledge will not become implicit second language knowledge. And actually, the strong interface position says explicit second language knowledge becomes implicit second language knowledge only through practice. So we have to practice using our explicit second language knowledge to make it implicit. So it's not enough to teach or learn explicitly. We have to practice using our explicit second language knowledge. So in this sense, the strong interface position also says teaching or learning explicitly does not directly lead to the acquisition of implicit second language knowledge. We need practice. And also, these two positions share the view that communication is important. So second language learners need special opportunities to acquire implicit second language knowledge. So the no interface position says we can acquire implicit second language knowledge even through only through using our second language for communication. So if we use our second language for communication, we can acquire implicit second language knowledge. And also, the strong interface position says, yes, we need practice. We need to do practice, but our practice should match natural or real communication. So this position also says communication is very important. So our practice should match real communication. No matter how much we do, no matter how much mechanical practice we do, we cannot acquire implicit second language knowledge. We have to do a lot of practice that matches real or natural communication. So communicative use is the key to acquire implicit second language knowledge, whether you take this position or this position. So communicative use is what is important. Okay, this is it. Thanks for listening.